Hello everyone. It has been a while since I have uploaded a real video on this channel because a lot of the videos that I've been uploading for the last few months have been reels or shorts or whatever you want to call them. I don't like doing those, but anyways, I'm recording this on my PS5. I didn't. All of my footage is uploaded to YouTube, and I just don't really feel like editing anything in the background, so I'm just going to use this screenshot from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as my backdrop. This is mainly the type of video that you would listen to in the background for background viewing while you do whatever task that you are doing, so I hope that is at least entertaining and coherent. I also don't have a script in front of me, so all of this is from the heart. And if I stutter, then, well, I might as well just start all the way over. No, I'm just kidding. So anyways, Final Fantasy VII, man. So today, I finished Rebirth, which is part 2 of this remake trilogy for Final Fantasy VII, which is widely regarded as one of the most beloved games of all time, with a passionate fan base, depending on who you ask at least, or depending on what corner of the internet you're on. So I'm not going to be talking about spoilers for Rebirth. I'm actually not going to bring up spoilers for Part 1, the remake, either. If I mention a spoiler, it's most likely going to be for the original 1997 game, but again, I'm going to really try my best not to dive into anything spoiler related. This is mainly just me venting and talking about my overall experience with this trilogy of games, the original, the remake, and Rebirth as a complete set. So let's start at the beginning. The story started just about 2 months ago. So I was loving Baldur's Gate 3. I still do love Baldur's Gate 3, but I was hitting a snag in my enjoyment of it. Life was really starting to get crazy again, like it usually does around certain points, like almost every year for me. And I loved Baldur's Gate 3 so much that I really just wanted to keep playing it no matter what. But I also felt myself losing interest in it the more that I tried to force myself to play it. Like, it was a really good comfort zone for December through January during my second full playthrough, but it didn't feel natural. Like, it felt like after that playthrough I had done everything that I wanted to do. I did technically do a speed run of Honor mode, which is like the extra hard mode. And while that was fun, it was technically a speed run, and it's not a playthrough that I'm proud of, except for like getting the trophy, and you get like the gold dice, which in my opinion doesn't really look that good, but whatever, that's not important. So yeah, I did dabble with an evil playthrough as well, although I will be honest, it wasn't really my own necessarily. I just made some tweaks to someone else's pre-existing one. It started in Act 1, like near the end, and then I just kind of made my own little tweaks and changed the character around and made them evil as shit. So I messed around with that for a bit, but then I tried mimicking my second playthrough by basically making the exact same character, which can go either way, honestly. And I think that while it was fun to have more of a reason to tweak the character's backstory and add more to their arcs and their relationships, it was fun creatively, but I just think that it was also just kind of draining. But real life was also starting to pick up more. Like, I got a new job, I started new college classes that are still very time consuming and stressful and make me question my life choices. So yeah, and with Baldur's Gate 3 too, patch 6 had dropped, and while that was an amazing update that added and fixed many issues, it also caused a lot more issues, especially on PC. I'm not the type of person to blame like the developers for updating their game, obviously not. But with a game like Baldur's Gate 3 and with how ambitious and big it is going to cause some problems that are specific to some people's console or system of choice or a mod or something really stupid. So there's just a lot of issues, and for me personally, I just had a lot more crashes, and there were more visual glitches, and there were just other stuff that was very unfortunate, and I made sure to test it out with mods and without mods, so that was also a very time-consuming process. I eventually just said, you know what, I'm gonna wait a few months, and that'll be it. Like, I need a break from it anyway. I've been playing it basically non-stop since like November or December, whenever it was, and by the time I had stopped playing, I think it was March. So that's where our story properly begins after that long intro, but there's actually going to be a little bit more backstory in a second. So when it comes to Final Fantasy, I have always loved it, but it was a series that I mainly experienced when I was younger. Like, I'm talking like 8 to 12 years old. Like, I was really young when I first discovered Final Fantasy. It was during my PS2 era, and I remember it was Final Fantasy IX. That was the first RPG that I'd ever played. Now, if you have followed my Instagram account, you might have seen at some point that I listed Oblivion as my first RPG. It's not entirely false, because while I technically played Final Fantasy IX first, Oblivion was the first one that I really played. Like, I sunk hours into Oblivion. Whereas with 9, I kind of gave up on it pretty soon after I played it, because I was young and stupid, and I didn't appreciate good storytelling that was so good that it didn't need voice acting. And plus, I was just confused on how to play it, so I just thought Oblivion was way more appealing. But by the time I had reached a certain point with Oblivion, I was like, okay, let me give Final Fantasy IX another chance. And then that's when I really started to love and appreciate it, because it was something different. And it's one of the only Final Fantasy games that I've played all the way through, and it was an amazing experience. I only played it that one time though, all the way through. I honestly, it's such a shame when you get older and you can't remember stuff like you used to. So it's like I'm gonna have to replay 9 at some point, which is on my bucket list. And the same thing honestly happened with 10 as well, Final Fantasy X. I played it. I remember really liking it at first, but I got to a part where I was stuck at, and then I just spent I spent more time playing Skyrim, because that was, Skyrim when it was still new back then. God, what a time to be alive. And I eventually went back to 10, and I finished it, and that's the only other Final Fantasy game that I had beaten to that point, and once again, it's a game that I only played at that time. So I really don't remember much of 10 either, but it's okay. That's why when we get older, we go back to those games and we can actually appreciate them way more than when we were a kid. It's fun. It's a good feeling. And then from that point, I had started to dabble with almost all of the other Final Fantasies in the series. Like, the first 3, very humble beginnings, but not my favorite to play through. 4, 5, and 6, very underrated. They set the standard for the series and the foundation, and they were just generally really good games. Final Fantasy VIII, I remember playing. I just remember not liking it too much, but I understand where people are coming from when they say that it's underrated, and I do agree, it is underrated. It's just not for me, personally. Final Fantasy XI, I believe that's an online game, so of course I just never played it. Final Fantasy XII, I remember liking it, but it just didn't really interest me that much. Final Fantasy XIII is the black sheep of the series. It's the one game that everyone points to as their least favorite. Well, some people, a lot of people at least. And yeah, 13 to me, it's just not really, it's not a good Final Fantasy game. It's a decent game, it's just not really a good Final Fantasy, if that makes sense. 13 2 I actually liked a little bit more. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO. I played it 2 years ago for the first time once, and then I never played it again. I'm sure I'm missing some really good stuff, but I've just never been an MMO person. Final Fantasy 15, I played, I think it was a few weeks after, or wait, no, it was a year after it released, I think. Or was it 2 years? I remember playing it. I remember liking it. I got 50 hours in, but then I just never touched it again. And I can finally say that Final Fantasy 16 I have actually started today. Just a few hours ago, actually. I haven't gotten far. I'm still in like the tutorial phase, and so far I'm actually really liking it. It's cool. Now you might have noticed that I've talked about every mainline Final Fantasy game except for 7. 7 was a game that I had never owned when I was young. I don't know why. I don't know how. I don't know how I got every other one except for 7. I don't know why. Maybe because it was just more of a rare game, or maybe it was because it's one of those games that everyone who owns it, they're like, yeah, I'm keeping this one. Like, you cannot have this one. I would never let you borrow it. This is my most prized possession. Well, maybe not that far, but yeah, Final Fantasy VII is a game that I did not get to experience until very recently, 2 months ago to be precise. I saw it on sale. I was originally just going to play 9, but then I was like, you know what? No, Final Fantasy VII, I've heard so much about it, and I've been recommended it for years. Like, it's something brand new, something that's still Final Fantasy. Like, what's the worst that could happen? So I bought it. It was like only $3 on Steam, and I did mod it. I didn't like go crazy modding it. I just wanted to like bring it up more up to speed, like frame rate wise, and I wanted to update the models a little bit to make them look a little less silly, but they look silly no matter what, which I loved. Um, then I started playing it, and I was like, all right, let me just see if I like it. What's the worst that could happen? And then I just let it consume my soul. It did not take long. The first few hours, I was immediately intrigued, invested, and I was already really liking it. I liked it even more the further that we were getting out of, like, we got through the Midgar section, and then out of Midgar, and you get into the open world, and it just felt so nostalgic. It just reminded me of 9 so much, like when you first leave Alexandria, and you finally get out into the open world, and you hear that song, and you're just walking around, and you get those random fight spawns, and it's just so fun. The battle music, the music in general, and the same thing is with 7. And the thing with 7 though is that I didn't have the nostalgia of growing up with it. So this was like, okay, this is something brand new. And yeah, man, I remember just taking my time and training and basically doing everything that I could have done. There were some stuff that I missed, unfortunately. There was a few things that I missed, but I did try to do like all of the optional side quests. I got both optional party members recruited, which wasn't really that hard to be honest, but it's still something that is missable technically. And I just remember really loving the characters and the story. Like I loved how misleading the story was like during those first few hours, and then like when the further you start to get, the more the things will start to click. And this is going to be my first little spoiler warning for the original game, not the remake or rebirth. So I just wanted to give you the little heads up in case you haven't, if in case you need a spoiler warning for a game that's over 30 years, almost 30 years old now. So the thing that I was unfortunately spoiled on before I even started playing 7 was Aerith's death. Because it was like on these countdowns like of like most memorable or most sad character deaths, and I'm just like, maybe I would feel something if I understood the context behind it. And when I got to that part, during that first playthrough, that's when I understood, and I was so shocked when the death was permanent. Like Aerith was dead, like she's gone, like you can't play as her anymore. You get her materia back, you just can't use her anymore. And I was just like, oh my god, like that is shocking, because like she's the group mage and healer basically, So it's like, holy crap, like what do I do? And I loved that moment because it just felt like something that was out of your control. Like you can make choices in Final Fantasy VII. It's not nearly as in depth as some people make it out to be. Like it's not like your typical Western RPG where like a lot of choices can make impact on even small things that can maybe lead to some contradictions later down the road. No, the choices in Final Fantasy VII are very simple, but that kind of decision, that's usually something that can be based on a choice that you would make in any other RPG for the most part. But no, Aerith's death is unavoidable. There's no way to avoid it, and she's gone. And it's just like, wow, like, and it just makes you hate Sephiroth, the main villain, even more. Like when he takes that away from you, when he takes her away from you, because like that's like your friend, that's your potential love interest based on your little choices. It's just crazy, man. And it was such a good moment too. Like even with those graphics, those silly little character models, it just, man. And then obviously her theme song. So yeah, I'm spending a lot of time talking about that, but yeah, it wasn't just that moment though. Like there were so many other moments in Final Fantasy VII that I loved experiencing for the very first time. Like shortly after that, another spoiler warning, you basically get to relive Cloud's backstory, and you also get to connect to Tifa, who's like the game's other potential love interest, and in my opinion, she's Tifa. That's all I'm gonna say on that. But yeah, just the live stream sequence between Tifa and Cloud, that is, in my opinion, the peak of the game. Like the emotional climax of the game, if you want to put it that way. Like Aerith's death is still shocking and iconic, and it's depressing as hell, but then you get that moment, the emotional catharsis between Cloud and Tifa. And then shortly after they have like a little high, like the high wind scene, like where they're just like sharing a night together, and it's very wholesome. But there's a lot of other moments too. Like there's Barrett's battle with Dyne. There's Red 13 or Nanaki going back to Cosmo Canyon. There's Sid going into outer space. There's Vincent confronting Lucretia. There's just so many good character moments. I mean, I guess there's Kate Sith's sacrifice too, but it's actually one of the only parts of the game that isn't that great. It hasn't really aged too well, unfortunately. So yeah, there's just like a lot of moments in the original that have aged very well, honestly. Like the storytelling is on point, the characters are so well written and lovable. And then you get to the end and you fight Sephiroth, two versions of him at least, and it feels so satisfying. It feels so fulfilling and, again, cathartic. And then it's over. And then in that moment, I was like, wow, like, this is the third Final Fantasy game that I've ever beaten, and I could, it could just be recency bias, but I don't know. Final Fantasy VII, to me, it was what I needed. It really was. Then the next day, before I went to work, I was able to get 4 hours into the remake. Now, I'm not going to mention too many spoilers for Part 1 or Part 2, but remake, to me, it was just so fun to play through it and be like, oh, they kept that, or oh, okay, they changed that, and oh, they didn't include this at all, that's weird. And, I usually don't want to be that type of player, but it's also kind of hard not to be, considering it's literally called Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's the same thing that I did for Resident Evil 2, like, when that got remade. It's like, okay, like, what are they keeping? What are they changing? What are they taking away? Same thing with like Resident Evil 3 and 4. Like those are very good examples of remakes and comparing them to the original. You have Resident Evil 3, which is a game that is loosely based off of the original, but then you have Resident Evil 4, which is like pretty much the original, just with some new stuff and just really nice graphics. And that's kind of what remake is for Final Fantasy VII. But it's also different. Like, really, my biggest issue with remake was the fact that for such a short portion of the game in the original, Midgar was the center focus of the entire game that could span 30 to 40 hours, even on a short playthrough. And, it just felt like there was a lot of unnecessary bloat in some areas, but then again, I have to remember, like, you do get a lot more context for certain stuff and characters, and obviously the character moments, even just in this first part, were a lot more expansive. There was a lot more expression and emotion because of the voice acting and the stellar motion capture in certain scenes. And yeah, by the time I got to remake, I was like, oh man, like I'm not going to be able to wait. I'm not going to be able to wait to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I'm not going to be able to do it. So that was the whole reason that I made the decision to buy a PS5. And it's not that I was against the idea. I knew I would have to do it eventually in case there was something I really wanted that was coming out specifically for PS5. But before I decided to get it, like, I was really just set on not buying one. Like, because the games that I had seen that were coming out for PS5, they were either under-delivering or it just wasn't enough to convince me, like, okay, you need a PS5 to play this specifically. Like, true, when it comes to Rebirth, I could have been patient and I could have just waited for the PC release, but I don't know, man. No, probably not. Probably not. Oh, just look up the story on YouTube. No, it's not the same. You have to play it. I hate doing that. If I'm that curious, like, maybe, I guess it just depends on what game, but if it's something I'm genuinely interested in, like, I want to play it for myself. It's just like a movie or a TV show. So, yeah, after Remake, I was left conflicted with how I felt about it, but over time I was like, you know what? This was still a really great game. I had a lot of fun, and it really was fun. Like, it was a really good game, really good adaptation. I don't really think it's fair to say that it's a remake. I would say it's more of an adaptation, which is pretty much the same thing I can say about Rebirth, but without spoiling anything specific, it does a really good job of adapting a lot of stuff from the original while still adding new stuff and expanding. And some of the expansions are nice. So, yeah, it was actually a month ago yesterday that I got my PS5. I set it up. It took like almost 3 hours for Rebirth to download, and it was so worth it when it finally got downloaded. And I remember I just got through Chapter 1 that same night, and then I had to work like 5 days in a row. I was so pissed. I was so pissed off. Like, the one game that I was really looking forward to, and I had to work 5 days in a row, all at different hours. So stupid, but I got through it. That's all that matters. But yeah, so Rebirth, it was not only my first PS5 game on my first PS5, but it was also just something new in this universe that I loved. And I started playing it at such a good time because I just beat Remake, and I was just like, okay, like, let's keep the engines rolling. Like, I still retained my memory of the controls and the story and the characters. And without going into too much detail about Rebirth, I have to say, like, it was worth it. It was 100% worth it to buy a PS5. Like, genuinely. Like, if there was ever a game specifically to play it on a console, like a PS5, I'm glad it was this one. For me, at least. For me, personally. obviously not everyone's a Final Fantasy fan, and obviously I don't think that everyone would like Rebirth or even Remake for that matter. But yeah, for me, this was the reason, and I am so glad that I did, because again, without spoiling anything, Rebirth to me it just felt complete. It felt more like what part 1 should have been. It didn't have that unnecessary fat trim. Like, sure, to some people there is a lot of bloat in Rebirth, but a lot of it is optional. Like, a lot of it is optional. It was not, to me, I never felt like I was forcing myself to do something except until late in the game, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah. And on my Instagram, I was actually like ranking like all of the chapters like on a scale of 1 to 10. So like chapter 1, it was like 10 out of 10. Chapter 2 was 10 out of 10. Chapter 3 was like an 8 out of 10, just because it was really short and there wasn't really a lot to go off of. Like just going through each of the chapters. Chapter 9 was an infinity out of 10. I still think that was probably my favorite section of the game, maybe. At least maybe. Chapter 12 I also gave the same ranking, I believe, but it was also during chapter 12 that, without spoiling anything, it is the part of the game that just throws everything at you. So if you have not been doing the mini games or doing the side quests, then this is the chapter that will really nail that home. Like, hey, like before you progress, you should probably do all this now. And then even if you have been doing everything, there's still a lot more stuff left to do. A lot of the quests are short, but then there's also the added additions of the mini games, which again I'll talk more about in a second. But it was during this part where this is where the fatigue started to kick in. My playthrough of Rebirth lasted 125 hours, just about, which is good, but a lot of that, at least towards the end, it did feel like, a little fatigued. It was mainly just because of the minigames. Now, the minigames are the biggest criticism I would say is relevant for Rebirth, which, on one hand, a lot of the minigames are fun, but it's not fun if you're trying to get like tier 3, which is like the highest score for whatever minigame that you're playing. Like, some of it's not really that difficult. Like, I actually got tier 3 on a lot of them pretty easily. Some of them took like 2 or 3 tries, but it wasn't really that difficult. But then you have something like the 3D Brawler, or the Crunch minigame, or even the Cactuar Trials late in the game, like the hard mode version of those, and oh my god. Like, basically the minigames, the combat is actually very forgiving if you make a few mistakes, but not the minigames. At least those specific 3, which I think is just kind of funny because, but then again, I think the same people that are complaining about the minigames, they seem to forget that this has kind of been in every Final Fantasy. There's always been some type of BS like that, and it is technically optional. But at the same time, I do understand why people say that like these minigames specifically are tied to the main story in some capacity. I didn't really notice that though. Like, I don't know. I mean, you can technically, I'm trying to remember, it's actually been a while, but I think there were like a few that were tied to the main story specifically, but like I think a lot of them were just side quest specific. Like, I don't know. I think that people just like to complain just to complain, but I personally did a little bit of complaining. It was just with those 3 though. Not with Queen's Blood though. Queen's Blood is the card game that's like Gwent from Witcher 3. I loved it for like 98% of the game, at least until the last few hours. So, getting off topic. Yeah, so chapter 12 was the point where I was starting to feel fatigued, so I took a few days off. Like 2 days off, and then I came back yesterday, got through chapter 13, and then today I finished chapter 14, which is the last one of the game. Oh man, and it is such a relief to know that it's done, but God does it suck, because it's just one of those feelings that you get when you finish a really great game for the first time, and you know that you're never going to be able to play it for the first time again, and you just feel empty. I hate. It's such a great feeling to have as a gamer, as messed up as that sounds, but it's really just a horrible feeling too, because it's just like, man, what do I do now? Like, what do I do with my life now? And yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much where I was at today. I decided to start Final Fantasy XVI just to start it, but I wasn't really going to plan on investing too much time into it yet. I was actually going to try to take it a little easy, because this project, going through the original, then remake, then rebirth, it's taken almost 3 months, and that's really not a long time, especially with the power of hindsight, because a lot of time has not passed. But it's still something that I was so committed to, and something that I truly fell in love with, and it just came out of nowhere. I have a really bad tendency to overshare my feelings about stuff that I love, and it's just part of who I am. Like, I just love sharing, like, my opinions about stuff that I love and stuff that I dislike, but I really try not to be that negative, because there's just enough of that on the internet, or just in general. Like, I really just, like, if it's something that I feel needs to be criticized, then of course I want to share my thoughts on that, but I cannot overstate how much I have loved playing Final Fantasy VII. Just the original, the remake, and rebirth, just all of it. Just this complete experience that's still not even over yet, because now we have part 3 of this remake trilogy that's going to be the conclusion. I'm so excited for that. But yeah, I genuinely... Sorry, I just... It's just crazy. Every now and then I'll play a game like Baldur's Gate 3, or Dragon Age Origins, or Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, or Ghost of Tsushima, Red Dead 2, or Witcher 3. I'll just play a game that just reminds me why I love video games. And it's actually funny. Like, I want to do a video breaking down my top 10 favorite video games, but it's so freaking hard to think of that, because I love so many games. And I also like to throw in, like, some curveballs to not make my list seem so obvious. But, I can confidently say without any hesitation that, just from what I've played, even if maybe it might be viewed as recency bias by some people, that's fine. I can confidently say that Final Fantasy VII is in that list. My top 10. Maybe even top 5, maybe. I don't know, that might be pushing it a little bit, but it's definitely in that list, I would say. Maybe top 5, you never know. That's a video, that is a video that I would like to do at some point. But yeah. I just loved the story, the characters, the music, the battles, the RPG elements, the replayability too. Like, I wouldn't say it's like endlessly replayable, like something like Baldur's Gate, or one of those RPGs. That there's a lot more I could think of, but I wouldn't say it's endlessly replayable. But I also appreciate the fact that it's just something you can jump into whenever, kind of like Skyrim or Oblivion or Fallout. Like, it has that little appeal where you can just start a new game and just go straight into it, and the gameplay is addicting and simple, but still has its moments where you have to, like, be considerate about what you're using and who you're using and what equipment you have. And that's just the original too. Then you play the remakes, and it's like you actually have to, like, try a little bit harder in combat, and because it's like real time and tactical. It's just like, I could talk about it all night, but I feel myself getting very tired, so I just want to close out with just being grateful to have played this. Yeah. truly grateful to have played this for the first time. And yeah, I'm not gonna go straight back to it, but it is gonna happen again later this year. Maybe like after my birthday in June. Maybe that might be a plan to do again at some point pretty soon. Like might go back to the original because I do want to record the original game. There's a voice acting mod that sounds really good, and I want to record everything in that game just like I have for Remake and Rebirth. And after the original, I would actually like to do kind of a live stream or maybe like a recording, like recording myself playing Remake and Rebirth, like just to do that, like a let's play. I don't know, that might be interesting. Um, Maybe not though. It just depends. Um, but yeah, just an amazing experience, and I can understand why it's so beloved, and I'm proud to say that I am one of those people that love it so freaking much. And I'm also proud to admit that I love Cloud and Tifa as a ship. There, I said it. That's a good stopping point. That's such a good ending for the video. Yeah, let me just stop right now. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, just real quick, I want to gush over like Cloud and Tifa's dynamic and Tifa as a character. Like, oh my god, like she is just wonderful. She's just a wonderful character. That's like I like Aerith too. Don't be wrong, but you know, let me stop. Let me stop. I don't want to start a comment war. Anyways, if you actually listened to all this, thank you very much. I'm gonna try to upload some other Final Fantasy VII related videos, and those will include spoilers. So I'll be sure to include warnings on that. So thank you for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.